temperature associated with the current level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is locked in for at least the next 1,000 years, according to the paper in the February 2009 issue of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. And all of those half measures don't get us close to drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If we throw them all together into a big bucket and start, say, 40 years ago, taking them seriously, then we might start to take an edge off of the annual increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But we're not doing that, unfortunately. Again, you know, we had the warnings so many years ago, and it was just so much more fun. And I'm as guilty as anybody. When I got my driver's license at the age of 14, there was no stopping me from driving a car that got 14 miles to the gallon. You know, that was fun. And not only that, but I was born into this culture the same as everybody else. And what do we do? Mostly we do what everybody else does. And in fact, if you start doing things that are sort of inconsistent with what everybody else does, that doesn't usually go well. You're not everybody's doomist cult hero if you start acting a little weird, right? Much less doomist cult superhero. You had a question right back here?
Why does it take 50 years to turn off a nuclear power plant?
That's to decommission. You could turn one off relatively quickly, but to safely decommission. So one issue, one relatively minor issue in the whole decommission process. Most of these nuclear power plants have cooling ponds that are 4 or 5 stories above ground. And they are called spent fuel rods, but they still have a lot of energy in them, a lot of nuclear energy. And they have to be constantly placed in a water bath of recirculating fresh water, and that water has to remain cool. And they have to be cooled slowly over a decade or so before they can then be safely removed and put into dry storage caskets.
Is it depleted uranium?
It's not depleted in the sense that we hear about with weaponry, for example, but they're called spent fuel rods because they get rid of enough of the plutonium or uranium that they're no longer really, really hot. So then those ones get taken out, stored 4 or 5 stories above ground. This is the case in Fukushima, in these pools of water, swimming pools 4 or 5 stories above ground. What could possibly go wrong on an incredibly volcanic area known as the Ring of Fire? And then the new fuel rods are put in that are really hot. They still have a lot of energy in them. And it's a constantly recycling in and out process to use the best, most high energy fuel rods. And so those spent fuel rods, and this is what happened in Fukushima, when they evaporate off the water, because the cool water was not constantly being added because the generators ran out of fuel. So then the water is no longer being recirculated, so the water heats up really quickly, it boils off, and it produces the kind of fires this planet had previously not experienced when those spent fuel rods exploded. They're really, really, really hot, and they spewed ionizing radiation all over the planet. Fukushima may well be an extinction level event for humans over several generations. The Pacific Ocean is already characterized by large dead zones off the coast of Japan that weren't there before. And there's so much that we don't know. You know, Helen Caldicott has been pointing out for 50 years the risks associated with nuclear power. And we just keep forging on as if they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they're horrible in every way, and there's so much that we don't even understand about the consequences in terms of lethal mutations that arise from being exposed to ionizing radiation.
Do you know the difference of the
No. No, I don't know. You know, I've become a generalist like everybody else in academia, I started as a specialist. And once I left active service at the university, I became a generalist. So I started looking at all these different factors. And that's how I came to inherit this horrible title of being the leading authority on this particular topic. But what that means is on so many of the specifics, I don't know anything. You know, I depend upon the specialists for their incredibly deep knowledge about so many of these topics, and I'm just able to skim the surface because there's so much there. There's so much that we don't know. It's remarkable, actually. Yes, they're in the back.
So when you talk about what an individual can do, or a family, or us here, what are some of your thoughts of like people getting giant arrays of solar panels, or eating with wood, or can you talk a little bit about what are some of the solutions? What is the implications of like cooking all with wood and firing with wood, or getting your giant solar panels or a giant geothermal?
So in 2003, I began planning my escape from what I knew at the time was an omnicidal heat engine, to which we affectionately refer as civilization. But I knew that it was responsible for killing hundreds of species every day. I'm a conservation biologist. The three pillars of conservation biology are speciation. When and with what predecessors does a species come into existence? Extinction, when does the last individual species die? And habitat, what's required to support that species? So that's my expertise over the last many years. And I recognize civilization as being a bad, bad child. And so I decided that I would just run away. And I made my escape. In May of 2009, I left active service at the university, haven't drawn a paycheck since, spent all of my pension almost immediately creating a platinum-grade homestead where I could live off the grid and grow all of my own food. And I just assumed that since I'm a successful professor, that the entire world would take note and follow me. I didn't think it was funny. I still don't think it's so damn funny, Mary. I thought we were friends.
We are friends, and you're so funny.
I just thought, because I had this whole thing worked out, and I pointed out that we're driving all these species to extinction, we're fouling the air and dirtying the water and washing the soil into the ocean, and every civilization is characterized by endemic racism and endemic misogyny and endemic monetary disparity that leads to poverty, and all I have to do is show the way. Come here, right here, everybody just come along, we're going to grow our own food. Look, I have a shovel. I could barely distinguish between a zucchini and a screwdriver when I started the damn project, and here I am growing all my own food in 2 years. I'm milking goats. I'm making cheese. I'm raising chickens. I have a goose named Myrtle. And nobody gave a shit. Nobody followed along. So I've been living off grid since then. And so, well, first I had to destroy every relationship in my life. You're getting a little ahead of the story. So I lived at the homestead in New Mexico that was relatively near the University of Arizona. So I made that initial escape, and then after I destroyed every relationship in my life, I moved to Belize with this young lady behind the camera. Yeah, I thought it was pretty awesome. A whole bunch of people didn't think so.
That's not him.
Yes?
First, I wanted to let everybody know that there's Rise for Climate March on September 8th, and it's going to be all over San Francisco, New York City, and speak louder.
Rise for Climate March, September 8th, all over the world. Is there a local chapter or group that's putting something together?
New York, New York City, New York City, there's a big group of Woodstock, and then I had a question. Do you know anything about the geothermal experimentation above the Blue River
Do I know anything about the geothermal
They are
near Phoenix, the Gila River?
I was told by somebody who knows, who does some work in calculations, they're doing an experiment with creating a barrier. I don't know the technical words for it, but ozone barrier by dumping chemicals like 20 miles above the community. Somebody from Harvard has started the study, and I was wondering, since you're from the area, if you know about it, I think it's still not like well known. There's a couple people who do know about it, but it doesn't seem like anybody's really reacting or voicing their opinion.
Right, I think you're referring to geoengineering, not geothermal. Okay, so David Keith is a professor at Harvard who has proposed solar radiation management, the most commonly proposed idea to cool the planet. He has proposed doing an experiment with solar radiation management over Arizona and New Mexico, which, by the way, clearly violates international law. I'll not the United States give a shit about that. And has been demonstrated, it's the most studied geoengineering technique and has been found repeatedly to not work. David Keith has not asked anybody, any of the residents of that area, if they want to be sprayed with geoengineering technology. And so perhaps one of the reasons you don't hear about it is that I don't think there's any way it's going to be carried out. The literature is clear. When the United States National Academy of Sciences concludes 3 years ago that geoengineering, and most of those studies are solar radiation management, when they conclude, when this conservative body concludes that that's going to make the situation worse, not better, then I don't think it's going to get much traction. And of course, it would be attempted over the Gila River Indian population. Whitehead.
Just to piggyback on the
Geoengineering.
The dropping of chemicals out the back of jets all over the country every single day, chemtrails, is part of that geoengineering.
That's right.
And if you're saying it doesn't work, and people know you, who can you speak to get it to stop? It's a daily thing, all over the planet.
Clearly, since not a single person followed me in my quest to abandon civilization, I'm not going to have much impact over anybody that matters. When I say, remain calm, nothing is under control, this is what I'm talking about. Certainly not under our control. So I'm not even going to head down that road, all the way in the back there.
Yes, I'd like to know if you can talk about a little bit more details on the workshop that you have.
Yes. She wants to know if I can talk a little bit more about the workshop, the Only Love Remains workshop. I would encourage you, if you're even remotely interested or not, you're just looking for entertainment, to go to onlyloveremains.org, and you can find out a lot about the workshop. But the bottom line is the workshop is designed and facilitated for people who have accepted the terminal diagnosis, who actually acknowledge that not only am I as an individual going to die, but that the human race, like every other species before us, Homo sapiens, like the 6 other species of Homo that preceded us, is going to go extinct too. So if that's you, and you find this to be, we'll say, a lonely experience, because nobody will talk to you about it, then the workshop might be for you. So we spend an hour and a half or 2 hours the first night describing what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and assigning exercises that are relatively easy to complete logistically, but that are almost impossible to complete intellectually and psychologically. Then this is the workshop for you. So then we give you the entire second day, 9 to 5, to hang out with us, spend time, eat meals with other people in the workshop, and work on those exercises. And ponder the questions that you've never thought about before. What the hell are you going to do with your life now that you know you only have days, weeks, or months to live? Now what? And then we get together the final day, which is 6 hours in session, in small groups and large groups, answering those questions in small groups and in large groups, and learning from each other what we might do in light of our terminal diagnosis. It's been an extremely powerful process and workshop for the people who have participated. In fact, 2 people in the audience tonight participated in the workshop we had in Belize in July of this year, and came here from Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and Los Angeles after they became fast friends in Belize, and are hanging out with us on tour the whole time because the workshop was so powerful. And one of those people heard me speak 4 years ago, 4 years earlier, and it took her 4 years to get to the place where she was peaceful enough, we might even say calm enough, to proceed intellectually, psychologically with this information. So we have a couple of examples here. I suspect they would be happy to talk with you one-on-one or in small groups after we break up here. And bottom line, it's just been enormously powerful for the people who've participated according to what we hear. But everybody might be lying to us, I don't know. Yeah, pink shirt.
I heard you on radio last night. You have been telling me about months. My ex-girlfriend has been telling me about you.
Is that why she's your ex-girlfriend? It happens a lot, I understand.
You know, and so on YouTube, and listen to my pretty thoroughly, can't be right.
Thank you.
Dylan Thomas, Dostoevsky says you're not wrong.
I know. I love for me not to be right.
No, I'm talking about the technocrats,
Uh-huh.
or Chernobyl,
Mm-hmm.
or the taxi driver. We all drive cars, in fact, I see a lot of cars out there. You can be right, even though you sound right. Even Edward Abbey sounds right. You can't be right. Even though I agree with you, but you can't be right.
About what?
It can't be the end. Yours is too beautiful. It can't, and we won't let it happen, but I don't know what we're going to do. You can't be right. I refuse to accept your diagnosis.
Guy, be Ron.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Be Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
I won't accept this, although you're nice. I don't think you're
It's fine.
Charlie Manson. You're not right.
That's fine. I don't care if you accept the terminal diagnosis you've been given. That's fine. That's great. I understand. I get it. I don't want to be right either. I think you're in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's first stage of grief, denial. Another question right here.
I want to project.
Can you hold this really close to your chin? Just put it right on your chin.
I would love to project the possibility that if you had many people follow you to believe, live off the grid, say half the population of New York City, 4 million people, what would the ramifications be on the planet just from that? What I'm saying is there a positive feedback mechanism. It's not all negative feedback. The positive feedback mechanism exactly is what Malthus's disease, warfare, and starvation. That in the process of what is happening, so much of our population is going to die off. That there is that possibility that in small pockets here and there, we will survive and go back to a primitive form of living. What you're describing believes only works because you don't have half a
What will they eat? What will they eat when it's too hot to grow anything?
If you don't mind, I'll answer the gentleman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's a fine question. And, you know, I first made this move. I started making the move in 2003. It took me 4 years to find a place. Started transitioning off-grid in 2007 and made it official in early 2009. and lived at the homestead in New Mexico for 7 or 8 years, and only within the last couple of years have lived in Belize, and had as many people as I wanted followed me, none of us would be alive today. Because the absence of global dimming that would have resulted, which we didn't know anything about in 2003 or 2007 or 2009, would have killed us all. The temperature of the planet would have heated so much because people dropped out of civilization. There wouldn't be habitat for humans anywhere on the planet. Had everybody gotten on board with me in 2009, we wouldn't be having this conversation, I'm sure of that. So I thought I was doing the right thing, and as it turns out, in retrospect, in light of new information, it would have been a bad thing, and this happens all the time. We do things that immediately seem to be a mistake because I broke my leg doing this, and then later it turns out that some good came of breaking the leg, and then some bad came from the recovery, and so on and so on. There's all these things, it's just a mix, it's just what it is. I suspect, had a significant number of people followed me, we wouldn't be alive today. So it's a damn good thing nobody took me seriously. And probably if everybody was with Ron, and they're not taking me seriously now, that might be a good thing for all I know. I really encourage people to take what a Buddhist would call right action and not be attached to the outcome. Because I taught for 21 years in college classrooms that we got too many people on this planet, and that adding more people is not going to improve anything about the human condition. And then every single one of my students, as nearly as I can tell, went out and had children. Every single one. If I were attached to the outcome, I wouldn't be a happy person today. I would have been devastated. Right here.
You showed a chart which showed that in 2026, the world will be exceeding that's 8 years from now. I'm curious to know why you chose Belize, close to the equator, instead of some northern location, and will the northern locations closer to the poles be cooler in that time?
During the previous mass extinction events associated with global heating, and there have been 2 previously, and we're in the midst of the 3rd, life has persisted near the poles longer than at the equator. Everything dies off near the poles near the equator first. Life persists near the poles. However, something is different this time. We've never had global dimming come into play before. We've never been spewing particulates into the atmosphere that serve as an umbrella for 250 years previously. So that's a new thing. Most importantly, I didn't move where I moved to survive. Not even an extra day. I'm going to die. It's going to be soon. It probably was accelerated by moving to Belize. Every day, pursuing excellence and pursuing love, instead of pursuing mediocrity and pursuing indifference, matters for me. I don't know whether it does for you.
Well, no, I agree. Pursuing love and excellence is a very important thing, but will there be northern climates where we can survive?
It would surprise me very much because of 2 factors. Global dimming. Already, the Arctic is heating up 5 times faster than the global average. Whoops. That doesn't bode well for the species that evolved to live there over a span of hundreds of thousands of years. In addition, there's global dimming. Even if it's 1 degree in a span of 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years, no species on the planet that is sessile, like plants, can keep up with that rate of change. They just can't. And without plants, we're going to have a hard time eating. I mean, there's always Soylent Green, but not for very long. Because of 7.6 billion people, that's just going to run out really soon. Sure.
whole lot of information if people are interested in, because of Indian Point. And my question is, Paul Hawken is coming back to Omega to speak about drawdown, and I've been working on climate change issues for more than 20 years. It was the first time I had an inkling of hope. I'd like you to respond to drawdown and the work that those scientists are doing and the potential for particularly ecosystem-based solutions for restoring the earth back to balance.
Oh, I just have to add something. Guy, this is Nana Jo, who we've been telling you about for, we've been talking to him about your work, Nana Jo. What a force she is for the climate.
Thank you for the question. You bring up two important points. Drawdown, which has been demonstrated by the National Academy of Sciences and a European body of similar stature to not be an effective approach to addressing anthropogenic climate change. And you bring up a better judge of our character than strangling the beast that is killing us on our way out the door.
Strangling the beast that's killing us, and earlier you said go down swinging. Shouldn't we go down swinging?
It seems like I'm a violent human being, doesn't it? For somebody who's accused routinely of telling people to lay down and die, I seem like a fairly violent person. Yes, I think we should take action. Absolutely. Because a miracle might happen. There's never been one, as pointed out by Hume, in the history of our species. But that's no reason to give up on the idea. But seriously, it could be that some comment, we can't predict the future with certainty. I know for certain that you're going to die. I know that our species will go extinct just like 99+% of the species to inhabit the planet so far. Does that mean I can identify your expiration date? No. Do I know when the last human being will go extinct? Will die? No. We don't know how long we have left. I think it, quote, will be rather short. But how would I know? I'm just a college professor who dropped out way too late. Yeah, all the way in the back.
My name's Marty Gordon, and on the kind of note of going down fighting, well, I kind of like your message. I'm developing the Woodstock Festival in 2019 in Paris complex, a series of events. And what is fascinating to me is that whether or not you're right or something, personally, I think there's a lot of that. Whichever way it goes. So, anyway, what fascinates me is that there's no voice in ecology. 60s and 70s were all carried by song, and there is nothing in the popular vernacular. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of songs, but there's nothing. So that's the mission of Woodstock Ecology, Defense and Festival. So if anyone's interested, it's really building, and I think it's a really interesting initiative. It starts with the art and the voice and the vision, and to carry the message, just like it happened in the 60s.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask one more question because people are starting to filter out. So right here.
Today I heard a gentleman on the radio speak. His name is Ben Davis, speaking about the cycles of solar sunspots, magnetism, and impact on the heat of the Earth. Are you familiar with his work?
I'm not familiar with his work, but I suspect I'm familiar with the ideas that he talks about, solar cycles and the Maunder minimum and the mini ice age and blah, blah, blah.
Any impact in the near future?
No. You know, the Maunder minimum, the so-called mini ice age, resulted from a 0.4 degrees Celsius decline in temperature. 0.4 degrees. We've warmed the planet beyond the because of the Industrial Revolution by 1.75 degrees. 0.4? That's way behind us. We could cool the planet by 0.4 degrees, and I guarantee you we'd be nowhere close to a little ice age, or much less a big ice age. These people like Adapt 2030 on YouTube, and a guy, I think his name is William Casey, who are telling us about the forthcoming ice age, big ice age, little ice age, whatever. There's no evidence to support any of that nonsense. But you don't need evidence when you're on YouTube. I hardly ever even call it YouTube, I call it the troll farm. Because that's what's being bred there and raised in great numbers. I see no evidence to support those ideas. And I haven't heard of Ben Davidson, but I bet there's not much there. Okay, one more question. Just one more all the way in the back, because you've been so, you're like me when I was in first grade, and I would do this.
When you tell the class about the raise in temperature of planet because of the methane release, because of the disappearing ice and the loss of reflectivity, that's so big.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which we generally peg at 1750, there was about 750 parts per billion methane in the atmosphere. Methane, or CH4, is a primary component of natural gas. It is more than 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is, molecule for molecule. There were 750 parts per billion in 1750. Now there's more than 2,000 parts per billion. And when we lose the ice in the Arctic, or maybe even before we lose all the ice in the Arctic, there's a group of researchers headed by Natalia Shikova from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who described a likely 50 gigaton burst of methane from beneath the relatively shallow seafloor of the Arctic Ocean that they said was highly possible for abrupt release at any time. That was late in 2008. Here we are 10 years later with a lot less ice than there was on the Arctic Ocean in 2008, and I'm stunned we haven't had such a release of methane so far. And if we do, that would cause an almost immediate increase in global average temperature of 1.3 degrees Celsius, taking us far beyond the point at which we've had humans in the past. And it's such an abrupt rate, it's such a rapid rate of temperature increase, it's difficult for me to imagine human habitat would persist more than a few weeks or months beyond that. So this is a tremendous increase in methane that we're talking about, and it represents less than 1% of the billions of tons of methane on the East Siberian Arctic shelf, where Shikova and colleagues do their research. Much less in the entire relatively shallow seabed of the Arctic Ocean, much less the terrestrial permafrost that is found throughout the circumboreal north. So even a less than, and in fact, Jason Box, glaciologist formerly at Ohio State, he left Ohio State because he was so heavily censored by his administration, so he works for the government of Denmark now. He runs the Dark Snow Project. He said if we experience a release of even 1% of the methane hydrates, less than 1%, and there's a famous quote, and I'm going to quote from it directly. He said, if that happens, quote, we're fucked, end quote. Interestingly, a year later he was interviewed by Tom Hartman, and he was asked about that. And apparently he'd received a memo. And so then he said, well, Tom, I think we need to remain calm about this whole thing. We can't actually predict the future, and maybe it's not as bad as I described. But I think he was right both times, actually. I think if we do experience even a 1% release of those billions of tons of methane in the relatively shallow seafloor of the Arctic Ocean, or even the terrestrial permafrost, even 1%, I think we're fucked. And I still think we should remain calm. I think he's right both times.
Would you say that well justified, that attitude. No,
Yeah.
I'm serious.
I know you're serious. And
Did you repeat that?
the gentleman asked if I would agree that his two sons who refused to give him grandchildren, his line, not mine. I don't even know these young men. These wonderful young men refuse to have babies for him. And do I think that's justified? Yes, I think that's justified. I think it's been justified since I was 19 years old when I decided not to have children.
That's right, yes.
I don't see any problem getting made any better by adding more people to the mix unless you have a truck that's stuck in the mud and then more people is good to push them out. Other than that, really, I don't see the point of having a bunch more children. Thank you. I'll stay as long as anybody would like. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.